and once again a warm welcome, this time from me. My name is Janna Linke. I'm an editor and presenter for the German news channel NTV, and I'm today's moderator. And we are now diving into a super exciting panel discussion where we are looking back to look forward. And these are some of the questions we are going to look at. How far have we come in the development of the travel sector? What have we learned from the successes and the challenges? And most important, how will the future of mobility look like? And to answer these questions, we have with us today some super exciting guests who will offer very different perspectives on this topic, so you can look forward to this. But first, some housekeeping rules for you. You can submit questions if you want on slido.com. The hashtag is Flix10. And I will be looking at your questions during the discussion. I have my phone here, and I will be addressing your questions to the speakers as we go. For the people in the back, maybe you didn't hear me, it's slido.com and the hashtag is Flix10. And now I will move to the other speakers because I want to introduce you to our guests, and I will start with you, Kristian. He is the Director Land Transport in the Directorate General Transport in the EU Commission. In other words, he is responsible for everything related to bus and trains in the EU Commission. And thank you that you are here, Umberto de Pretto. He is the Secretary General of the International Road Transport Union, and he is representing transport companies in more than 100 countries from all 5 continents. So great that you are here. And a warm welcome to you, Professor Dr. Andrea Giuricin. He's an expert in transport economics, specializing in regulation, a senior consultant to the World Bank and the United Nations, and your various studies on transportation are well known all over the world. So thank you that you are here. And last but not least, a warm welcome to André Schwämmlein, the CEO and co-founder of Flix. The company's green buses and trains, they are well known all over the world, and their goal is to make travel easier, more affordable, and greener. A big round of applause for all the speakers, please. And unfortunately, not everybody was able to join in person here today, but we received some very interesting video messages that we want to show you during this discussion. And as we are here in Munich, the heart of Bavaria, we want to start with a video message that we received from none other than the Prime Minister of Bavaria, Markus Söder.
Normalerweise, wenn man zu einem 10. Geburtstag geht, dann ist es ein ganz netter Kindergeburtstag. Da gibt es ein paar kleine Geschenke und man unterhält sich ein bisschen und hofft, dass alle am Abend wieder gut nach Hause kommen. Dies ist ein besonderer 10. Geburtstag. Ein Mega-Unternehmen mit einer Mega-Idee. Meinen ganz großen Respekt an die jungen Gründer, die den Mut hatten und den Pfiff hatten und die Idee Flixbus auf den Weg zu bringen. Ich habe das sehr früh immer begleitet, habe von der Idee gehört, gebe zu, war am Anfang auch ein bisschen skeptisch. Aber ihr habt mich überzeugt mit eurem großen Einsatz. Aus dieser kleinen Idee der Strecke zwischen München, Nürnberg und München, der Hauptverkehrsachse natürlich in Bayern, dann aber doch in 40 Länder der Welt hinaus sich zu entwickeln, mehr als beeindruckend. Da gibt es immer wieder Schwierigkeiten und Herausforderungen, aber die Idee Fernlinienbusse ist eine, die wir in Deutschland nicht so kannten und jetzt neu da ist und hervorragend ist. Es ist ja gar nicht so leicht heutzutage. Die einen kämpfen ja immer gegen die Straße. Ich bekenne mich dazu. Natürlich brauchen wir Schienen, natürlich brauchen wir Bahn. Die kommt sogar ab und zu pünktlich an. Aber wir brauchen natürlich weiter auch Straßen und die Busse sind eine sehr gute Gelegenheit, pünktlich und schnell und kostengünstig die Menschen dorthin zu bringen. Ich finde die Idee und die Ankündigung, Klimabusse einzusetzen, um den ökologischen Aspekt zu verstärken, richtig und wichtig. Wir wollen euch da auch gerne unterstützen, weil ich glaube, das ist genau der Weg, den wir brauchen. Verbieten ist das Falsche. Wir haben Menschen, die verbieten ihm alles, wollen Straßen zumachen, sagen, es darf kein Auto mehr benutzt werden. Am besten sollen alle nur mit den Fahrrädern fahren. Aber es ist ein sehr weiter Weg, allein zwischen Nürnberg und München, das mit dem Fahrrad zu fahren. Auch beruflich wäre es für viele Herausforderung. Bayern ist Autoland, wir brauchen auch Straßen, ist Flächenland. Und deswegen sind Fernlinien ein wichtiges Thema. Und wir werden auch einen guten Weg finden müssen, um eine Ergänzung zu finden im Vergleich zu dem 49-Euro-Ticket. Da muss man sich überlegen, wie man die Fernlinienbusse in ähnlicher Form, zumindest kooperativ behandelt, wie das normale Ticket. Also noch eine Menge an Hausaufgaben, die wir sicherlich bis zur Volljährigkeit mit 18 gelöst haben werden. Und ich bin sicher, dass dann ein noch properer, noch erfolgreicher Flixbus dann unterwegs ist. Mein totalen Respekt, ich kann heute leider nicht dabei sein. Wäre gern gekommen, wäre mir eine Ehre. Bin leider anderweitig gebunden. Wünsche viel Erfolg und sage toi 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 für die Zukunft und totalen Respekt. Bayern ist sehr, sehr stolz auf euch.
Thank you, Markus Söder. A very euphoric video message, I have to say. And I would have loved to ask him the following question I have for you. It's our icebreaker question. Please show of hands if you have been, the speakers, please show of hands if you have been on a long distance bus in the last 6 months. André, you see there's still work to do, big potential.
Big potential.
Still big potential, even after 10 years. And what brings us here is the 10th anniversary of Flix, whose first line departed, we just heard it in the video from Markus Söder, from Munich to Nuremberg on the 13th February 2013. And what made this possible was the opening of the German bus market to competition. But I think we could say that it all started a bit earlier with the EU liberalization of the long-distance bus market in 2009. So my first question is for you, Kristian. Yeah. You from a EU commissioner's perspective, why was it so important to liberalize this market?
Well, first of all, happy birthday, Andrea, and happy birthday to Flix Bus and Train. Competition, yes, but I think we can also see that all the advantages in terms of passenger mobility, choices for European citizens. André spoke early on about connecting people, integrating cultures. We all know of Interrail for trains, how that has brought generations of young Europeans to know each other and to believe we're not just a single market in Europe, we are also people. And so connectivity is in the DNA of the department that I work for. Then there are all the climate objectives that are also very important. And I think the message that buses are public transport, collective transport, and they are competing with the individual car. And so climate change, of course, is essential. So the integration of the European markets, member states opening up for competition, it has been shown in all other sectors that this increases the offer, it increases and improves affordability. And so for those reasons, of course, the Commission was also promoting integration of the European bus market. And it's a joy now, 10 years after the founding of Flixbus, to see that that business model has prospered and created a true pan-European company with a global outreach as well.
So you would say it was a success story?
Well, certainly a success now for Flix. I would say our job at the European Commission in terms of liberalizing the European long-distance bus market, that is not yet done. I think we still see obstacles in member states. We have a proposal on the table since 2017 for further liberalization. I won't go into EU regulations, but there is still work to be done in lifting the obstacles. But it seems in the current environment there are companies that are still able to prosper. But so a success, yes, but job not done.
Okay, let's have a more global perspective on it. Umberto, buses are the backbone of transport in many countries all over the world. What would you say? What could the EU, Europe learn from other continents?
Well, firstly, let me also wish Flix happy birthday. IRU is celebrating 75 years this year. So, André, don't worry. Decade by decade, you will get there. And but slowly but surely, you'll get there. In the rest of the world, when we look at the whole concept of firstly creating more competition, is good. As a means, business needs to compete to be more effective, to offer better service to the eventual clients and customers. But we've seen around the world, it's been a bit of a hiccup, depending on which parts of the world. If you even look at Canada, where I'm from, or versus the United States, where you go big bang and do it immediately, you have more difficulties. You need more time to adjust. Where there's a smooth transition period, it's done in a much, let's say, more elegant way. Why is that? If you just all of a sudden open up all the markets, an example I'd like to use, you have a car driver license. Is that correct? You know how to drive a car. Does that mean then by definition you can tomorrow start a taxi company just because you know how to use the tool? Maybe. It depends if you have business instincts. It's a business, it's not a hobby. And so we have to make certain that the entrants into the market know the business and add value coming into the business. And that's why you have to accompany any deregulation, any liberalization with measures to assure that those who are coming into the market add value, actually add a service to the customer, to the client, and that we do it in a way that all actors can compete, whether it be small, medium-sized companies or the larger companies like Flix, that they can all actually have a role to play in the market.
Now you have the opportunity. Kristian Schmidt is sitting next to you. Do you have a wish from the EU? What should they do make better? Do you have something in mind?
Yeah, focus on your railways.
On
Good. It's really liberalizing and having more competition within the railways. I think that's to have a system that works. I think this is it. And despite the title of being the Secretary General of a road transport organization, I have full belief in rail, but then it has to be made more as a business rather than something run by governments. When you put business people behind a service, it works. Governments are not good at running businesses. We see this in the airline industry. We see this around the world. Business is good at running business.
Would you like to work for the International Rail Organization as well? Because I can see you can add a value there.
Yeah, well, somebody once proposed that, but
okay, I think
I'll
there's
stick to the
something developing here. That's good. But we will hear from a government side, not from a business side, something now. We received a video message from the French Transport Minister, Clément Beaune, and he will share his thoughts on the success of the liberalization of the French market.
Messieurs les cofondateurs, cher André Schwämmlein, cher Daniel Kraus, cher Jochen Engert, mesdames et messieurs les élus, mesdames et messieurs, je suis très heureux de pouvoir vous adresser ces quelques mots à l'occasion de l'anniversaire des 10 ans de Flixbus, même si ce n'est malheureusement que par vidéo interposée. Je souhaite vous féliciter aujourd'hui pour ce très beau parcours, car vous faites partie des pionniers européens du verdissement de la route au service d'une mobilité populaire. En France, l'aventure Flixbus a commencé avec la loi dite Macron de 2015, et il faut le reconnaître, le développement du secteur a été plus qu'à la hauteur de nos ambitions. Le nombre de voyageurs transportés a augmenté rapidement et a même dépassé en 2019 les projections réalisées au moment de l'ouverture du marché, avec un pic d'activité de 11 millions de passagers en une année. Je le sais, la crise sanitaire a, comme dans tout le secteur des transports, fortement touché votre activité, mais vous avez su faire preuve d'une très forte capacité de résilience et de rebond. En termes de nombre de voyageurs d'abord, en rétablissant les chiffres d'avant-crise dès 2022, mais aussi sur le modèle économique en augmentant vos recettes moyennes. Je vous félicite car c'est votre travail qui a réussi à ramener, une fois cet épisode de très forte pandémie passé, les voyageurs avec confiance de nouveau dans vos bus. Et cela était essentiel car votre activité est au croisement d'intérêts essentiels pour notre société. Bien évidemment, l'intérêt social. Flixbus est un acteur qui agit au service d'une mobilité qui inclut davantage, qui répond à une liberté fondamentale, celle de se déplacer de façon abordable. En étoffant aussi l'offre de transport, les sociétés comme Flixbus ont permis aux usagers d'accéder à nouvelles opportunités. En 2019, ce sont près de 2 millions de passagers qui ne se seraient pas déplacés en l'absence de vos autocars. Un avantage pour le pouvoir d'achat, bien évidemment, puisque la libéralisation a permis aux voyageurs français de réaliser un gain de plus de 160 millions d'euros, nous l'estimons, en comparaison aux autres modes de transport. De plus, contrairement à une image parfois toute faite que l'on pourrait avoir du transport routier, les bus sont un atout dans la transition écologique. Le développement de l'autocar a permis d'économiser 15 milliers de tonnes de CO2 par an, agissant ainsi pour la décarbonation de la route. Cependant, la comparaison avec les pays voisins montre que le marché français n'a pas atteint son plein potentiel de développement. Alors, pour l'aider à l'atteindre, nous devons lever encore quelques obstacles, en améliorant la qualité de service des gares routières, en articulant mieux le parcours des voyageurs avec les autres modes de transport. Je crois profondément à cette intermodalité pour l'écologie. Et plus globalement, nous devons répondre aux tensions en matière de recrutement, en renforçant l'attractivité des métiers du transport routier dans leur ensemble et en y associant tous les acteurs. Sachez que le gouvernement, que je serai toujours pleinement à vos côtés pour favoriser ce potentiel d'activité au service de la mobilité du plus grand nombre, en complément des autres offres et au service de la transition écologique. En espérant que cette soirée soit aussi belle que toute l'aventure Flixbus depuis le premier jour, je vous dis à très vite.
Merci, Clément Beaune. Merci. And let's take some steps forward. After the liberalization of the bus market, the EU also opened up the rail market to new players to one train. So the question is for you, Andrea. You have done different studies on the competition in transport, and Italy is often given as one of the best examples how you can see that the liberalized market offers new services, both buses and trains. What can we learn from Italy?
Yeah, I was lucky to work at the beginning with Italo. That was the first private operator on open access 2012. And it's very interesting because the effect on the market due to the liberalization is extremely positive, as in the road transport, in the bus, long-distance bus transport. And what we saw is an increase, double the demand with the same network. So no new investment in the infrastructure, same network, but we have the double of the traffic. And then the price also decreased 35-40%. So what I want to show that it's the reduction of price, there's more affordability for the customer, more quality. For example, between Milan and Rome, you have a train every 5-10 minutes during the peak hour. Right now, Milan-Rome is 600 kilometers. And what I work also, for example, in Spain, liberalization. In France, they are going farther with a small introduction from December 2021. That finally is good. Liberalization in the rail is very, very good for all the people that want to travel, that needs mobility. And what it was told before, that intermodality is very important because, of course, rail reach different targets many times than the buses, long-distance buses. To fulfill a train of 500, 1,000 people, you need a lot of demand. And the buses is 50, 70 seats. So it's completely different demand, but you have to work together to finally to fulfill the needs of mobility that is needed all around the world. And liberalization is the best way to do that because you have a private operator that came there, the punctuality is important, quality is important, so all working together, all the government all around Europe, go in this direction, we can reach a better solution for mobility. And Flix is really an example on that side because not only for the buses, but also for train, they started services around Germany, Sweden, and maybe in the future also other countries, but it's really interesting how is important for the consumer.
Okay, André, we talked a lot about you. Now we want to hear from you. What was the difference in starting a bus service and starting a rail service?
There are a lot of similarities, but also differences. And I think, tagging along what Kristian said, I think the opening of the market is in different shades and form in bus and rail, and you have different barriers. And I'm a big fan of open market, and there has to be a transition, but the goal should be the as open as possible market. And I think of what you see, not only in Europe, but also around the globe, governments and incumbents find a ton of excuses why open markets are not good, and all of them are made up. There is no real reason. You have no case where opening up a market in competition in rail and bus and airlines respectively, but I think that ship has sailed and is done, has been negative in any way for society. So I think every argument that I hear around the globe, being it in Europe, being it in another continent, is made up. And that's very, very frustrating. On bus, you have a great regulation across Europe, pan-European, so I do a connecting service between two countries, great, but then I can't run in a single country. And then 1, 3, 4 of the European countries make up reasons why in their country specifically it doesn't make sense to run a domestic service in competition. And obviously the only reason is vested interest of other parties. So that's highly frustrating. In rail it's more the big things. It's more the like track access charges, incumbents like having control over infrastructure. So it's more the big things. So the big differences are rail, you know the big 3 levers, you move them, you are done. In bus, it's very tiny and small, and that's also frustrating. So I think both are equally challenging, but I have the feeling we are getting there. We're getting there very slowly with a lot of pain, but we will get there.
So was it a good idea to start a train company also? You are present in a lot of markets with your buses, but not in so many markets with your trains.
I totally believe it's a good idea. Obviously, I have to believe that. That would have been a disastrous statement now. No, I totally believe it. It was in our initial business plan. The first business plan we wrote in 2012 included Flix train as a mode of transport in green. And when I pitched that to investors, they were like, okay, that's crazy. Stop doing that idea. You do buses. It's train has nothing to do with that. Please don't do it. I said, no, it has to work together. It's one mode of transport at the end. Therefore, yes, I believe it's a great opportunity, because I believe the regulatory environment will develop in a positive way. And as I said, we are in there for decades, and I hope on the 20th anniversary I can look back and show all the proof points that we have fulfilled. The agenda and the predictions are here right from me.
Okay, looking forward, I would just like to ask one question from Slido to you. André, understood it right? Söder said yes to Flix in the Deutschland ticket. What's the speaker's response to this message from Walter Suckert?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of that statement. Actually, I haven't heard the statement before. I wanted to be surprised from all the statements, so I didn't know any of that. No, I think it's very obvious, and it's unfortunately in many cases in politics, there is positive sentiment towards us. In that element, a prime minister saying you should be somehow included in the Deutschland ticket. The political action is what is missing. So I hear a lot of positive reinforcement. We like you, we like your product, great what you're doing. Will I act for you politically? Will I take a stand? This is what I need. So yes, a great first step, but at the end I need a law changed. I need something happening, and nice statement is a good step, and I appreciate it a lot and will thank Markus Söder for that statement, but I hope it leads to political action.
Okay, we will watch it, and I think we can say that it has been a good progress, but we are not there yet. And if we look at the last couple of years, we could see that transport was facing unexpected challenges, just like COVID, or now the terrible aggression, the Russian aggression against Ukraine and the consequences. So, general question in the round, what did you learn from this crisis? Maybe André again, and then the other.
I think I won't replicate myself, so I keep it short. I think we will have to fight very hard for our role in transport, and I think we learned during COVID that it's not granted, and we have to fight harder as operators to make good service and get our role, and it's not given to us. I think that's a big learning, so it is big motivation for us.
What did you learn, Umberto?
Well, firstly, if we look at it globally, COVID, just looking at COVID, not the war.
Yeah.
I'll talk about the war in a second. COVID cost the passenger transport industry, road passenger transport, bus and coach industry, over $500 billion around the world in losses. 30% of the transport companies, bus and coach companies, had to lay off their workers. They had no more business. Think of it, at one point, there was no more business. Everything stopped. So, hats off to André and his team, that with 20% of the 10 years spent in that period, and they're still here and still looking at future growth, that's quite an achievement. What we learned is that we have to work more closely and in anticipation with all authorities. When COVID broke out, I was sitting in my office, and I kept going to my office because I had to physically be there. And for me to enter a grocery store close to my office, or me to enter the same grocery store close to my home, there were two different ways to enter the grocery store. And I said, okay, if you have two different patterns, two different rules, how to enter the same store in two different parts of the city, you can imagine how difficult it is for people to coordinate around the world, crossing borders. what we've learned from that, and we worked with the World Health Organization, International Labour Organization, said, look, next time we have another pandemic, can we get it right from the start? And we've come up with recommendations, and there will be another pandemic at some point. We'll have other crises.
But not so soon.
Please. The pattern is normally every 100 years, but there could.
I'm fine with that.
Yeah, that one you can be fine. You'll have expanded around the world by then, and no problem. But what we need to get right is the immediate response, that people start coordinating, and that one thing we found through the WHO was all the border closures actually had no sense, no purpose. Medically speaking, served no purpose. We were even saying, why are you exposing our drivers to getting out of their vehicles and standing in line to be checked and actually exposing themselves to risk rather than staying in the cabin? So going forward, we need to coordinate much better. Private sector, public sector working together. We've come up with recommendations with the WHO, with the ILO, saying, next time, let's get it right from the start.
What do you say about this? What's the role of the EU in this case?
Well, my experience with COVID started when it hit. I was posted in a country neighboring China. So my first experience was evacuating and coordinating EU nationals when airlines were shutting down. Coming back to Europe, then you can imagine the impact on the single market if we hadn't acted and protected what we called the green lanes. In March 2020, when member states were shutting down their borders, it also meant a huge disruption to our single market, the trucks that were delivering the goods. And so the protection of our transport workers, the ability for them to continue to deliver goods all across Europe. We stayed at home, you remember, but things were still being brought to our shops and coming to our homes. And that was the transport workers, the truck industry, and also European rail freight. So yes, we can't have this instinct of shutting everything down. So we learned. We learned also, of course, that we need a resilient transport system. We need companies who can weather the storm. This happened in the middle of the opening to competition in rail, in buses, new entrants entering the market just in the middle of a pandemic. I mean, kudos to Flix for surviving this period. But I would also say, linking it to what you said, André, about the 49 euro ticket and the Bavarian Prime Minister. We need companies that are sustainable, not just environmentally sustainable, but also financially sustainable. And we cannot have rail companies that survive on public subsidies. Because what happens when the coffers are empty and if the pandemic is lengthy and they run out of subsidies? What we need are viable, also private companies who can survive a pandemic. There is momentum for rail, so there is public subsidies available for cheaper tickets. My job at the European Commission is not to hand out subsidies. My job at the European Commission is to reduce the barriers to entry, reduce the cost of interoperability for rail to work so that it's cheaper to run these services in a manner that is affordable to the citizens. This shouldn't be done with subsidies. This should be done with viable businesses coming to the market.
According to what you just said, I would like to ask you a Slido question from Wolfgang Gräber. To you, it's looking at flat rate tickets like the 49 euro ticket in Germany. Is there a risk that liberalized markets can be closed for competition again?
Well, there is always that risk. And then it's our job at the European Commission to implement and enforce the legislation. So no, this risk shouldn't materialize. As I said, in rail, we need more affordable rail tickets. This is, I think, something we all share. It's too expensive to travel by rail in Europe. And the reason are the cost of operations, the cost of crossing borders, the lack of integration of the rail markets in Europe. And again, it shouldn't be the taxpayer compensating for those inefficiencies that we have to address. What we have seen, and Andrea has studied it, and you use the Italian example, you can use the Spanish example, the Swedish example. We have seen that competition in those markets where there has been vibrant competition in rail, ridership has gone up, the cake has grown for everyone, and prices have gone down, and everybody has benefited.
Okay, I can see you're getting nervous and want to say something about it.
No, and the problem out of the pandemic, it triggered something that is very tempting. it's like state controlling what's happening in economy. It was required during the time of crisis, but it's a drug where you get easily addicted to. And I think this is something that we see at the moment, that the belief that a government can control markets with the power and the money they provide is something very European, because, I mean, power every government has, but not every government has money, and European governments usually have on a global scale relatively large amount of money. So I think this is a threat that we see at the moment, and it comes not only to travel, it also like energy and housing, etc. So I think this paradigm of the state runs at the end knows best, and we have state-controlled market. That's a tendency that we see and that we have to fight. And I'm very happy that in Europe, at least, we have the European Commission as a referee and the oversight of these developments. But that's, I think, an imminent threat in many markets, and it will disrupt and destroy markets. And that's something that I'm concerned of.
It depends on the market. We were happy that the European Commission bought the vaccines for everyone.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean we have to buy the rail tickets for everyone.
Yeah,
or the
and it doesn't mean that you have to like buy the companies that produces the vaccines, because that's the step that the national governments in the next step too, they buy shares, they allocate and stuff. So yes, governments play an important role, but we have lost a bit control.
And a lot of elements is also global coordination, because taking consideration between different sectors, we have different regulation on health. I remember very well in Italy where rail or buses have different maximum load factor they can have it, that in the aviation they don't have it. So they start to have this kind of element. So coordination is needed. And then other elements from the COVID-19 is flexibility. What we saw when this demand coming back in the 2022, that many companies were not ready, but many companies that were flexible, they were ready for this demand that was coming. And normally that flexible company are private company, because are more quicker, they are more flexible. So what we saw is something like that. And we have to pay attention not to put new limits on this flexibility, on this new demand is coming, because of state want to control. It's better coordinate, very easy coordination, very easy regulation, but then let the market, let the private company to develop the market.
Okay, that's
very well on that. If you look at the situation in Ukraine, who were the first ones who were there at the border to help the refugees get out? Flixbus and other companies saying, let's get goods in, let's get the people out. In Turkey, who were the first ones there to help? It wasn't the government, it's private sector jumping in and saying, let's help. During COVID, I don't think I've ever been more proud to be the Secretary General of the RU when I saw the response of our companies making sure that the goods were still delivered, medicines were delivered, everything was still delivered. People were still able to move when they needed to move. But really in time of crisis, whether it be the war in Ukraine, the earthquake in Turkey, we're the first ones there.
Yeah, I think it's important. We have to move on.
Yes.
I just need to, for balance, say that the legacy state railway companies were also at the borders for free, offering tickets for Ukrainian refugees. The private, everybody was there. Yeah. I was there with my commissioner. We were there. Everybody was there, and all of Europe stepped up, including the state railways, and they're still there.
And it's a important moment for Europe, and I think it should not be.
I think it's important that private companies and the government work together. And let's look forward. One of the biggest challenges we are facing right now is climate change. And as we just heard in the video from the French transport minister, he says that coaches, buses are key to decarbonize transport. And let's hear from the German transport minister, Volker Wissing, what he has to say.
Lieber Herr Schwämmlein, lieber Herr Kraus, lieber Herr Debus, liebes Flix-Team, meine Damen und Herren. Manchmal können Erfolgsgeschichten mit drögem Amtsdeutsch beginnen. Zum Beispiel mit einem Titel wie Gesetz zur Änderung personenbeförderungsrechtlicher Vorschriften. Das klingt nicht unbedingt nach Revolution und neuen Möglichkeiten, aber genau dafür steht dieses Gesetz, das der Deutsche Bundestag im Jahr 2012 verabschiedet hat. Schließlich wurde mit ihm der Fernbusmarkt in Deutschland liberalisiert und Flixbus war 2013 einer der ersten Anbieter, die diese Chance erkannten und auch nutzten. 3 junge Gründer hatten sich damals das Ziel gesetzt, Busfahren neu zu erfinden, es nachhaltiger, bequemer und zugleich bezahlbar zu machen. Aus dieser Vision wurde Wirklichkeit. Flixbus hat sich nicht nur etabliert, sondern ist heute der Marktführer im Linienverkehr mit Fernbussen. In einem fordernden, intensiven Umfeld und nach tiefen Einschnitten durch die Pandemie ist das alles andere als selbstverständlich. Möglich wurde es durch harte Arbeit, Mut und Weitsicht und durch das konsequente Setzen auf Innovationen und Fortschritt. Herzlichen Glückwunsch zum Jubiläum. Die grünen Flixbusse sind heute echte Hingucker auf den Straßen und werden gerne genutzt. Sie bringen Touristen nach Dresden, die Gründerin nach Berlin, den Sportfan zur Vierschanzentournee oder die Studentin zur Oma nach Hamburg. Flixbus hat das Busfahren für ganz unterschiedliche Zielgruppen attraktiv und zu einer echten Option gemacht. Busfahren ist angesagt. Das ist gut, denn je mehr Menschen den Bus nehmen, umso besser für unser Klima. Und das künftig noch mehr, wenn Busse alternativ und klimafreundlich angetrieben werden. Daran arbeiten Sie, daran arbeiten wir. Und gemeinsam reduzieren wir die CO2-Emissionen im Verkehrsbereich, und zwar ohne Mobilität einzuschränken. Damit die Flixbusse schnell und pünktlich, effizient und ohne Umwege ans Ziel kommen, müssen die Straßen leistungsfähig sein. Derzeit sind sie es nicht überall. Deshalb investieren wir. In diesem Jahr sollen etwa rund 8,5 Milliarden Euro in den Bau von Bundesfernstraßen fließen. Mit diesen Mitteln erhalten und erneuern wir nicht nur, sondern bauen auch neu, wo es nötig ist. Zugleich sorgen wir für mehr Tempo beim Planen und Genehmigen. Dafür werden wir die Prozesse vereinfachen, verbessern und digitalisieren. Dem Bus gehört die Zukunft. Eine Zukunft, die Flixbus mitgestalten und prägen wird. Ich wünsche Ihnen dafür alles Gute und viel Erfolg. Bleiben Sie mutig und innovativ. Schreiben Sie die Erfolgsgeschichte weiter. Vielen Dank.
Wow. Thank you, Volker Wissing. And
I was waiting for the moment where he promises we get in the Deutschland ticket, but unfortunately not in a video message.
No, not today. Maybe in the next days.
Yeah, maybe.
We will see. Now, hear from our panelists, and I want to start with you, Umberto. When people think about road transport, what first come into the minds, also in my mind, is exhaust fumes.
Yep.
So, how can you make road transport greener?
Well, I would start by saying that buses and coaches, if we look at the entire palette of options that you have in transport modes, bus and coaches are the cleanest mode of transport. Not only are they the cleanest mode of transport, they're also the safest mode of transport. Most people say airlines, air travel is the safest. No, it's not. It's bus and coach,
really?
Statistically speaking.
Yeah, the
He's
high-speed rail also is very safe.
Yes, but the safest in passenger kilometers are buses and coaches. So if you're talking about sustainability, it's not just about your emissions, it's also getting people from point A to point B in a safe way. Now, the biggest challenge we have is the fact that we have passenger cars on the road. One bus or coach can eliminate at a minimum 30 cars off the road. But you have these cars that are driven by people who vote. And therefore, it's very difficult for the politicians to say, well, I will take these cars off and I will put you on these buses and coaches because I want your vote. So the challenge is, how do we actually provide services that will make people say, yeah, I'm just going to leave my car at home. I'm going to get on a bus and a coach because it makes more sense. It's a good service. But to do that, it means that it has to be part of your overall strategy. We've developed a green compact strategy for achieving carbon neutrality by 2050. One of the 5 key components is bus and coach transport. If you don't do that, and you don't actually start thinking about it now, how do you implement it? How do you put in place a framework, whether it be the legal framework and even the infrastructural framework, to make sure that you can achieve it, you won't get it. And yet it's the no-brainer solution.
And what kind of role will innovations play, like new fuels?
One of another pillars is the new fuels, of course, the new technology, the new fuels. What will be the future fuel mix? I'll say it's a mix of mixes, because you will not be able to have electric everywhere. Hydrogen will come. Will you have hydrogen everywhere? No. So we're looking, and we're doing the analysis per region, saying in which region of the world are the quickest wins and what can we put in place. And then when we say that by definition electric is clean, it depends. It depends on how you're producing electricity. If you're in France, yes, you can say that the energy is quite clean because it's 92% nuclear, but then you have to deal with the issue of spent fuel rods. What do you do with that? When we still have countries in the EU that are burning brown coal, so big question mark on how clean electricity is. So you have to make a strategic investment in terms of having clean energy across the board. And I say electricity is an option, but it's not the panacea.
Okay, let's talk about fuel, André. Most of your buses are still using and driving with diesel. What are you planning for the future?
We're already working along the lines that Umberto outlined. Obviously, for me, it's not a question. Technology-wise, we will get there. It will be, at the end, electricity being in form of battery, being in form of hydrogen, which is only reformed electricity. So I have no doubts on a fuel decarbonization of the bus services globally. That's not the question. The question is when and which technology, and what do we need to enable? I think we are sometimes having the discussions of the past shadowing our mind for the discussions we should have. Because if you assume that at the end combustion engine will vanish, this will happen. And talking about the European Union, it will happen everywhere. I mean, cars will be no combustion engine, buses, trucks, it will all vanish. So maybe the discussion should rather be, what's the regulatory framework to get there? What's the infrastructure we have to provide? And what are the major discussions we should have? Because just making everything electric or hydrogen will not solve it. We will have an energy scarcity, which we at the moment experience. So we will discuss in 20 years from now, we will not discuss CO2 footprint of car versus bus. We will discuss that we don't have enough energy for the cars and that we don't have enough room in our cities for the cars. That's going to be the discussion of the future. I'm not saying we should not have the CO2 discussion today. We should anticipate already the discussions we will have in 20 years because we are a bit shadowed of, oh, car is environmentally bad and buses are good and trains are better or at the same level. All good discussions. But, I mean, we will not have enough energy and we will all depend on electric. We need a ton of renewables. We need the infrastructure and we will have to define the way how we want to live as a society. And cars are not a CO2 emission only. They are polluting our cities. We are stuck in traffic, and that should be the discussion. And they produce energy scarcity if we want to get independent from oil. That's a problem. And therefore, we should start these discussions now, because otherwise we stand in 20 years here and say, oh, we achieved what we wanted, sooner or later. Oh, but we have a ton of new problems.
Andrea, I would just want to ask you, what are the urgent steps that we have to do?
And there's another point very, very important that is a load factor. So the private put a lot of attention on load factor, how much I fulfill the train or the buses and so on, because it's profitability. And this is very important, but if you have on the same bus or the same train 80% of load factor, 90% of load factor, finally you have a lower impact in terms of sustainability for the CO2 emission for each passenger. And this is a very important element. So this is, we saw it also in the aviation sector, where we reach 95% load factor for some low cost. And this is a very important element to go in this direction. So private also allowed this kind of change of mentality, because it's money, also is money, but also is going for sustainability. So this is an important step to take in mind when we think about that. So if we continue to have a train with the 20% load factor or a bus with the 20% load factor, it's not profitable, of course, but at the same time,
waste of energy.
But a waste of energy, waste of is a CO2 emission, because if you have no passenger on board, is a big problem. So this is.
But how to change it?
How to change it? Is a private that changed this mentality because they want to make profit, and make profit means to have a higher load factor. Okay. Because for the same asset or same business model, finally you have more passenger, more revenues. Then you can increase what. It was implemented a lot, for example, revenue management, that we start to have in the bus sector, but also in the rail start to have something like that. Revenue management, so it's technology, it's a mathematical optimization to increase the revenues, help a lot on that side, because you can sell a ticket for €1, but your marginal cost maybe is close to zero, something like that. But finally, sorry that I'm too technical, but finally, the important is to have a lot of people on board on the same bus, on the same train. And private has this target. Private operator have this target because it is important for them.
But what André said is bang on in terms of energy. We need to start planning now. Right. Just to put it in perspective in simple terms, if you have a heavy commercial vehicle, whether it be a coach or a truck, the same energy required today to run that vehicle over the distances that they run, which is over 1,000 kilometers, their potential, you can provide energy to 144 households. So if you bring everything to electricity, how are you going to have an electrical grid that can still bring electricity to those 144 households? So you have to start planning now before rolling this out and saying, where will I get the energy from, with what renewables? You have to start thinking long-term, medium and long-term. And in the meantime, how do we get from here to there? Yeah. If there's things we can do today, so let's do them today. We don't say we have to do everything in 2050. Let's do it every decade. We can look and say, for each decade, what do we do? And then we can celebrate again the 20th decade and say, look how much we've achieved.
Okay, who is planning long-term is also the EU. Kristian, your big goal is to be the first climate-neutral continent.
Our big goal.
Our big goal in 2050, and we just heard that we have to bring more people on buses and trains. How will the EU help with it?
I can say our, because it was a Commission proposal, but it has become EU law, endorsed by Council and Parliament. So it is our goal. Transport, however, is the one major economic sector that is not yet decarbonizing. As you mentioned, I cover everything on land, so road and rail, and both have to contribute to the solution of decarbonization. For road, obviously, electrification, alternative fuels, hydrogen is the solution, and this is not just an aspiration. Also here there is binding EU legislation already agreed or coming only yesterday. The targets for phasing out the internal combustion engine for trucks was put on the table by the Commission. Of course, targets is one thing. You also have to enable it. So, for instance, a charging network for alternative fuels. Again, we are in the final stages of agreeing with Council and Parliament on what is called the AFIA regulation, so the Alternative Fuels Infrastructure Regulation, rolling out across the core road network of Europe, the charging stations that Flix and others will need in order to make this transition to cleaner. And you must invest, but we must provide the backbone of the infrastructure.
So you will help.
For sure. You can't set these targets if there are not these infrastructure in place. And for rail, well, you probably know this, but rail is, I think, more than 80%, 85% already electrified. So, and rail is, of course, in terms of energy efficiency, superior to all other modes. The challenge for rail is not so much greener. The challenge is to make it more affordable, so we increase the market share of rail, making it more affordable and more attractive. And you touched on that also, André, but we haven't mentioned at all, how do we fill up those trains that you also talked about, André? How do we fill them up? Well, people need to know about the offers. We need to make it a lot easier to book tickets, to combine. You talked about intermodality, going with a Flix bus to point A and then jumping into a train for a long distance journey. This is not easy enough. You have to have a much easier way of booking, and the Commission is going to make a legislative proposal also on that this year on multimodal ticketing, so that every one of us can find these connections, fill up the trains, fill up the buses, bring down carbon emissions.
Okay, so the solution is to make the service more easy so that everybody wants to take a bus or a train. And lastly, we will have a look over the Atlantic, and we will hear from the US, Jim Tymon, the Executive Director of the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials. I have to read it. He is representing all 52 states, and he will share with us the transatlantic perspective.
So I think the biggest benefit that intercity bus and rail service provides is connectivity between communities. So making sure that we're able to link urban, suburban, and rural communities is extremely important. We want to make sure that the transportation network as a whole provides options for people to be able to get where they need to go. in a lot of rural communities, they rely on intercity passenger bus or in some cases intercity passenger rail as their only mode of transportation to get to urban areas, to get to suburban areas, to get to doctor's appointments. So it's extremely important that we have a multimodal system that is robust and that includes alternatives like intercity passenger bus and rail. On the bus side, I think that it's just convincing folks that it is a great option to be able to use. In rural areas, I do think that people have accepted this as a good alternative to driving. But I think as we look at it across the country, it's more about making sure that we're able to show to customers, to the American people, that this is a great option for you to get from place A to place B. Well, I think one of the important parts is finding ways to co-locate all of these different modes so that as a passenger or as a customer, that you're able to seamlessly transition between different modes of transportation. So, maybe you're not on one of those main lines for intercity passenger rail, but you have intercity bus service that goes through your community. You should be able to take that bus into an urban area where you can seamlessly transition to that rail network to be able to get to maybe a city that's, say, 500 miles away. That seems to be a nice sweet spot for intercity passenger rail. So finding good intermodal locations where the connections are seamless for passengers, I think, is extremely important. And we've got several states and cities that have worked really hard to do that. So I think that that's the goal, is to identify success stories there and then to try to replicate that in more places around the country. One of the things that I have seen over the last 20 years is really a shift from a more highway-centric focus to more of a multimodal approach. And even today, I hear more and more people talk about mobility as opposed to transportation. And I think that means you have choices between the different modes of transportation that are offered to you. And the different modes that might be right for one group of people may not be the right fit for another group of people. So what's great about, say, intercity passenger bus is the ability that it can access so many different communities. On the rail side, you're kind of limited to where the rail infrastructure already exists. On the bus side, it's a flexible planning approach where you can identify areas where you can route buses to based on where the demand is. So I think from where I've seen the most change in the last 20 years is viewing the transportation network as just that, a network with different modes and different options for passengers and for customers.
Thank you, Jim Tymon. Very interesting perspective from the US. And unfortunately, we have to come to an end. We are at the end, and I want to know from you. Can you please summarize in one sentence, please, very, very short, I have to say it. Where will the transport sector be in 10 years from now in like a perfect scenario? And maybe we start with you, Kristian.
Citizens, Europeans, consumers, content consumers, and completely carbon neutral.
Okay, Umberto?
It will be certainly digital, because digital will be more intermodal. It will be decarbonized, and going beyond the 10 years, it'll become autonomous. If you want to put a picture in your head, it'll be like the movie The Fifth Element, except without Bruce Willis.
Okay, wow, wow. Andrea?
Yeah, more liberalized sector. That means that you fulfill better the needs of the customer.
And André?
It definitely will be more collective. It will be decarbonized. And I think we have the greatest time of mobility still ahead of us. So I'm excited about the next 10 years.
And Flix will still be there.
I truly hope that, and I'm a deep believer in that.
Thank you so much. A big round of applause for our speakers today. Thank you so much. And all